What if it rained food? What if Earth was a cube? What if we had 9 lives? What if bits could fly? It's absurd. If money grew on trees, if we didn't have knees, if we walked through life slightly magnetical, it's absurd. Absurd Hypotheticals.
Hello everybody and welcome to Absurd Hypotheticals, the show where we overthink dumb questions so you don't have to. I'm your host Marcus Lehner, and I'm joined here today by Chris Yee and Aaron Hoffman.
Ooh, different name.
Things are going wild because we have two things to talk about. One, say hi, Chris.
Hi, I'm Chris. You can't start until we say hi.
Hi.
It's funny, I usually say hey hi guys, and I don't have it written in my intro sentence I read, and it's been so long I forgot about it.
Usually we just wait for you to say it before we start.
Exactly. So let's get our guests in the conversation here. Aaron, tell me why you think you are qualified to answer hypothetical questions with us.
Well, to start with, I have a bachelor's in aerospace engineering, and I currently work for the U.S. Department of Transportation doing some research on transportation. In not serious, I sit in bed and just think about things sometimes.
Those are pretty legit qualifications.
Yeah, I'm a little intimidated. I think he's more qualified than we are.
Probably.
We can't have him guest too often because he might take over the show. We should acknowledge the elephant that's not in the room, which is Ben,
we killed
who's not
Ben.
here. No, Ben's not dead. He's just hanging out with his fiance weirdly. They're already engaged. I don't know. He's trying to court her or whatever.
It doesn't help that she's not allowed in the country for extended periods of time, so...
Yeah, I mean, that's what his excuse is. Oh, she has to go back to Trinidad, or, I can't see her again for a few months. I don't know, some nonsense.
We should acknowledge the other elephant in the room, that we've been gone for 8 weeks.
Yeah, that would be another good thing to talk about. So, it's been longer than I expected. Chris, you really fucked up your ankle.
Yeah, it was bad. And then we recorded a few episodes with my ankle still broken, because you lent me your laptop, but then that exploded.
Yeah, did we even get through a full episode, or did it crash on the first one we
got
tried?
through one episode.
Yeah, that was not a great start to 2019.
No, not at all.
But I'm very excited to be back. We have a great lineup of questions today, and I'm very happy with where they went. So I'm pretty much ready to dive right into it. And our first question of the day is, what if all roads were rivers? Chris, you want to start us off?
Yeah, so starting with the parameters, I think it was we discussed how we would make this work because it's kind of iffy. We said that there would be geysers, or not really geysers, but there would be a constant supply of water at the tops of hills.
Right, so that's kind of the problem we first ran into physically, was that if all roads are rivers, some roads are on slopes, and if you have a hill and all the water goes down the hill, you no longer have river roads. So we kind of finagled it. The best we could come up with is that the water that flows down to the bottom of a hill goes into the ground or a drain or whatever, and naturally gets moved back to the top of the hill, so it kind of constantly cycles through and keeps the rivers flowing.
Yeah. It's still kind of a little iffy how it works, but that's what we settled on. I think that works the best.
We've done worse to physics before.
Yeah. And then the other thing we said is that the water flows naturally. So I think we were discussing before that the river would go the speed of the speed limit, but we said that we're not doing that. Yeah,
I think it's a little too complicated. And
yeah, that was my exciting but not so practical interpretation of the question.
Yeah.
I'm kind of happy we put that one to bed.
Right.
So, yeah. Chris, tell us where you went with it.
Yeah, so I decided to look at erosion specifically, and so I think Ben actually mentioned erosion when we were talking about rivers before, and the rivers flowing up instead of down, and he said that the erosion would ultimately form land masses at the tops of mountains.
Yeah, I remember that one. That was our previous question, if rivers flowed in the opposite direction.
That was episode 2 or something. They're
not doing that this time.
Yeah, I don't get that crazy with it. But so with erosion and rivers, basically rivers flow through a channel, and the sides of the river channel, or whatever you call it, get eroded, and that material transports, and then it gets deposited somewhere else. And that happens with all rivers. And specifically in bends, so if a river is turning, the outside of the bend, the water travels faster, and then the inside it travels slower. So the outside of the bend is going to erode, and then the inside of the bend is going to deposit. And that's how, like, rivers, they migrate. They don't stay in one place. They, like, move around and stuff.
Oh, this already sounds a little problematic, Chris.
Yeah, it is. So how does this affect us? So it doesn't affect roads in, like, the middle of nowhere too much, like highways in the middle of deserts and stuff, and, like, some populated areas that are, like, more spread out. But in cities, it's definitely a problem.
Yeah, I can see that.
Yeah, wouldn't signs just end up in the middle of the roads at some point?
So it doesn't happen, like, it happens over a period of time. So it's going to be, like, we could probably adjust. But in cities, like skyscrapers, you can't really adjust a building. So this is actually specifically an issue with bridges already, because we have a lot of bridges that span over rivers. And in bridges, it's actually called bridge scour. So the soil around, like, structural elements of the bridge, so like the abutments and the piers, the soil erodes away from that and it exposes the foundation. And actually 60% of all bridge failures are a result of bridge scour or other water-related causes.
So 60% of all bridges fail because later down the line, like, oh shit, it's in a river?
Yeah. I mean, that's why the bridge is there, because we want to go over the river, but...
I mean, yeah, even though it's my engineering field as well, I feel like we should have thought of that one, guys. We should have thought about that the bridge is over a river.
And even if we did think about it, like, sometimes, like, particles are deposited somewhere and it changes the direction of flow so that the water is hitting at a different angle, and then it screws everything up.
So how expensive is it to correct the flow? You'll go back to the example of a bridge, to make sure that the bridge foundation is still on dry land, for that matter.
Yeah, so they do have some countermeasures. The main one is riprap, which is like a gravel sort of thing with, like, rocks. They put that on the foundation. It protects the foundation. I don't think they really direct. They might. I think they build some structures, like, upstream to try to direct it, but it's kind of hard to direct the river the way you want it to go. And so the riprap, and then there are also levees that they build as countermeasures. And these are both temporary. And the Federal Highway Administration, they suggest, instead of relying on these temporary countermeasures, to actually design foundations that are, like, water resistant or scour resistant.
Okay.
The problem is buildings and skyscrapers and cities, they're not designed for rivers, because why would they be?
Yeah. The Empire State Building does not have scour resistant on its list of qualifications.
Yeah.
It's got, like, tall and straight and not in a river is in the list.
Yeah. So I want to see, like, how much erosion would actually take place. And the number varies a lot depending on a lot of different things. Depending on, like, the velocity of the water, the angle, whole bunch of stuff. And it was hard to, like, pin down an actual number. But I found one study. I'm just going to go with this study because why not?
It gave you the numbers you wanted in the easiest form?
Yeah.
Sounds like our research.
And it said that an average of 3 inches to 3 feet of erosion per year. Really big range. And they said there is a maximum of 8 per year. 8 feet per year. So that's actually a decent amount.
That's quite a lot.
Yeah.
That is what? The rivers move that much?
Apparently. It seemed pretty high to me. But I found a different study and it had much higher numbers. So I went with this one because it sounded more reasonable.
Now, when they say 8 feet of erosion, is it like cubic feet or like it's over 8? It's 8 feet to the left
Like,
now.
yeah, it moves like 8 feet to the side. That might be at like a bend where it's like the angle is extreme or something.
That I could see, because I'm thinking back now, because the only river I know is this little creek in upstate New York where we would go and swim as kids, and I do actually remember the bends looking different a little bit than when I was a kid.
Yeah.
So yeah, they must actually move.
Yeah.
Well, I'm just thinking about the Grand Canyon. So the Grand Canyon has been carved out by the Colorado River, but the canyon itself is much wider than the Colorado. Yeah. So I'm assuming that would make a lot of sense. If it goes left and right, it carves each side out over millions of years.
Yeah. Yeah, 8 feet is a lot, and the standard sidewalk is about 4 feet wide. So that's going to be the immediate problem is sidewalks.
Yeah. It's about June of year 1 we're going to start having problems.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then because the number differs so much, I think the amount of erosion that happens and the problems that you'd run into would differ depending on what city you're in. So I looked at a few different cities. I started with Chicago. So Chicago is pretty flat. So I think like the water velocities will be pretty low, and overall, like compared to other cities, it'll be fairly fine.
So like the opposite of what's true right now.
Yeah, sort of. I don't know what you mean by that, but sure.
I meant Chicago has some troubles.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Yes, I did stop our podcast to shit on Chicago just for a brief second.
There's a chance that nobody listens from Chicago.
Yet. Hopefully someday.
Yeah, but 5 years down the line when we have 4 million listeners per episode,
and no one from Chicago.
I'm gonna get some pretty angry. Yeah, and Chicago is an abandoned wasteland that nobody lives in anymore. There still won't be anybody from Chicago.
So the next city I looked at was San Francisco, and San Francisco is pretty hilly. So I don't know if you've ever been to San Francisco, but they have like those sloped streets that are just like super sloped.
Yeah, I haven't been,
hilly.
But I've seen it in the films.
Yeah, so obviously the water's going to be traveling faster and more erosion's going to happen. They actually have cable cars in the streets too. I don't know exactly how that works. I think the cable cars will still be there because they're not part of the street. Right?
Cable boats?
The rail, cable cars.
I know. Are they going to be cable boats?
Oh, cable boats.
I mean, they could be. It's literally a cable in the road that they grab onto. So
yeah. So
I don't see why not. I mean, you could just have a cable go down underwater into what was previously the road.
I feel like you would be in the same position, though, so all the passengers in order to board, they'd have to swim to it.
I feel like we're going to get used to that anyway.
Yeah, probably.
Well, hopefully at that point, there'd be docks at common boarding zones.
And then the last city I looked at was Boston, because we're in Boston. And
oh, yeah, Boston's not good for erosion.
It's not good for erosion. The main reason is because we have super curvy roads that don't make sense at all and not grids.
Also, our entire landmass is just literally garbage.
Yeah, that too.
Loose garbage and clay is what Boston is built upon.
So I think the curvy roads are going to they're going to swing the rivers directly into our buildings and stuff like that. So New York and even San Francisco it's hilly, but it's still grid-ish.
Yeah, I would say New York's probably the best off because New York, not only is it pretty straight and fairly flat because they literally flattened it, is that it's also all on bedrock. There's no soil, it's just rock, all rock, which does wear away. See Grand Canyon, but much slower than trash and clay.
Yeah, those are 3 cities I looked at. Obviously, things would be bad for cities, and yeah. Aaron, what did you do for
did you not solve the problems of cities?
I didn't try to solve it. I just saw what was going to happen. I wasn't trying to solve it.
We're supposed to fix problems here, Chris. We're supposed to fix them. We're supposed to take the problems and then fix them because I don't want the Statue of Liberty to fall down. Well, that's already in a river, so that one's probably fine.
Cable boats. That's my solution.
All right. Aaron, what do you got here?
Okay, so I did the transportation and how I guess the transportation laws. That was my focus area, and of course I had a variety of ideas. And then I was talking to my girlfriend right before I came over here, and one simple solution made things much easier. So all this work and.
That's the problem with girlfriends, Aaron. I'll tell you, because I've done it so many times. I'm like, I got this great idea. I had all these problems, and I was doing this and this to solve it. And she's like, why don't you just do that? And I'm like, shut up.
So I was trying to figure out how intersections would work. So I had this idea of, braking and whatnot, and then of course my girlfriend just goes, well, what about a roundabout?
Yeah, that was my
Which
initial
just-
thought.
Well, I missed that one. So I think braking will still be necessary, but roundabouts make a lot of sense. It means you don't actually have to ever come to a complete stop, which is pretty difficult with boats or ships of any type. Just to give you an idea, a Toyota Corolla takes about 120 to 150 feet to come to a hard stop at 60 miles an hour. Ships can take miles, even with what is known as a full astern braking. So that means that they throw their propellers, engines in reverse.
How big of a ship were you looking at when you found that?
I was mainly looking at big container ships. I couldn't seem to find any anything on smaller boats, but I can't imagine that they stop at 150 feet. That's pretty... Yeah. I was also thinking about traffic lights. I feel like instead of what yellow currently means, which is, if I hit the gas, I can make it before the red, yellow will have to mean you really do have to stop.
Gray area there.
No law change, but just a like...
No, seriously, guys.
An attitude change for the populace.
Because you really don't want to merge into a roundabout in front of something that's hundreds or thousands of tons, and that, once again, can't brake. But I did come up with one braking solution. So the Panama Canal has these things called mules, which are electric trains. They're
like small horses, right?
Well, at one point in time, I'm assuming. Nowadays, there are electric trains that run on rails on either side, and they help with the precise movements to move a ship through the locks.
Oh, so they're like guide rails, kind of, but with trains on them.
Trains on them, so they hook onto the ships, and there's very little room on either side for these larger ships, so they help push it through the locks, and they also help with braking. So I had this idea of, as a ship was coming into an intersection of any type, they could latch onto a mule that could help with the braking.
That's a pretty cool idea. I like that better than just a normal rotary.
Or something stupid like a tram boat, or what I said before, the word that is not tram but means tram.
Oh, cable car.
Well, in California, the things on with the cable boat. Thank you.
I was like, I have no idea what you're talking
guys.
about.
Well, anyways, I'm assuming that we would see locks and canals occur much more often as ships became the transport of choice. One more thing, I feel like speeding laws would have to be much more heavily enforced, because the last thing you need is a building get ruined because the wake of a ship is too large.
Even slightly curved roads, if you go fast, you could easily just wander off to the side, right?
If you have the river flowing along with you, it'll help you stay in the river. I will say there is one thing I noticed about the roundabout solution, is if we take Chris's answer about how the erosion happens on the outside of a curve and you have roundabouts, all roundabouts will just get 8 foot bigger every year. And so every time you have a roundabout, it's just going to keep expanding and expanding and expanding.
Wait a minute, I thought it moved towards the inner part of the
soil moves towards the inner, so the soil on the inside stacks up on the outside, so the roundabouts keep getting bigger and bigger and bigger.
Yeah, that could be a problem, though. That would make it easier for larger ships to get around. It'd just be a gentler curve.
But if you have like a suburb and it's all roundabouts, they will eventually all expand out and then all merge together. And all that was land is now water, and all that was water is now land. And everyone is now drowned in the rivers of the day. Did I fix it? Did I fix it?
I just don't know what to say.
Nothing is probably best. Continue.
So, actually, that's pretty much it.
So, I was looking at a couple more corner case things. I think you guys solved all the big problems. So, first thing I looked at is salmon. And I was curious if all the different rivers suddenly going in all these different directions and suddenly there being infinitely more of them, if that would create some pretty funny salmon run scenarios. And I think the answer is no. I think the salmon would just die. But I did find it interesting that salmon actually use a 2-part system to navigate back to their birthplace. So the first thing that it is they are able to detect the geomagnetic sphere of the Earth like birds do to migrate. So they have, geomagnetically, they have a general location of where they are, and it actually gets imprinted on them when they first go out into the ocean. And then, so they can, from the ocean, find their way back to their entrance to their starting stream. And then they actually use their sense of smell to find the right river to go up, to go back to their ancestral home. But if the rivers are roads, and we treat them like we do our normal roads by throwing trash and shit and, things in them, then we're going to have a much worse time.
Not to mention, every single ship that's going through is going to
Hit
fuck
some
with the sense.
Yeah, hit some salmon. And who knows, maybe you got a bear in your Jeep, and the bear's going to hop out and take a few swipes for himself.
So, anyways, I have to imagine that boats being the common form of transportation now, that fish would be a much more desirable choice. If you're around fish more often, I think people would start eating it more. So I can't imagine that's good for the salmon population, or any fish population for that matter.
Yeah, well, if they have more places to live, it could be better for them.
That is also true.
If they can't navigate back to their breeding grounds, it's, for specifically salmon, they're not going to have a good time.
I can't imagine.
But that one didn't really lead me anywhere. And then I realized there's another issue about this that we have not yet addressed, and that is winter. So in the winter, small rivers and things will freeze. And, the length of a road is definitely within the range of what would freeze in cold weather. So the southern, equator-ish areas are fine. Florida's probably not going to be hit too hard. But the Northeast and the northern states are going to have to change things up in the winter time. So
does that mean that everyone has to put away their personal boat for the winter?
So there's some options. Obviously, you cannot use a regular boat to go on ice. That would be dumb and stupid, and it would just tip over because the bottom is all pointy. It's just not good on flat ice. Science. So what do people typically drive on ice? And the first thing that comes up is snowmobiles. And so at first I was like, do snowmobiles even work on ice? Because I thought they might be too slippery, because they're usually on snow, which has a lot of good traction. So I was like, are they too slippery on ice?
And they need to grip into the snow, right?
That's what I thought. Actually, they're fine because they're treads, not tires. They have enough surface area to not slip around on the ice.
Interesting.
There is a problem specifically with ice, though, and snowmobiles, and that is because snowmobiles are designed to be used in the snow, they actually use the snow to pick it up into their engine and cool the engine down.
Oh.
So the solution is, if you want to use it on dry ice, is you get what they call ice treads, and what that does is it actually is these cleats that go on your tire treads that cut up the ice so that you have snow to you have crushed ice to go into your engine to cool it down. Problem with this is that if everybody has these nice is shaving off the top layer of ice as they go over it, you're going to go down and down and down and down until you collapse into.
At some point, yeah.
And which actually brings it to the second problem, is that snowmobiles are heavy, and there's gonna be this awkward time where the roads are frozen, but not frozen enough to support a pretty heavy snowmobile.
So you're gonna have a odd time where it's not good for your boat to go through.
Your boat can't go because it's frozen.
Yeah.
But your snowmobile can't go on because it's not frozen enough. So I was looking at other things that can go on the ice. With some real hard Googling, I found ice boats are a thing. And basically what this is basically a sailboat, but on the bottom it has skis attached.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. Also, if you are imagining in your head and you think, hey, this may seem exceedingly dangerous, the answer is yes. Because it's just this little wire frame, one person actually lays down on this thin canoe-like shape, and the wind takes it. To put it in their words, and they actually can go pretty fast. In their words, it says, the only seeming limitations to ice boat speed are windage, friction, the camber and shape of the sail, strength of construction, quality of the ice surface, athleticism, and fearlessness of the sailor. So it's basically
I'm looking at pictures of this, and this is something I would not get in. I would not ride one of these.
Yeah, so the main version of this is the International DN class, which is a one-person racing boat. It can get up to speeds around 10 times the current wind speed, and usually ends up in top speeds around 60 miles an hour. But if you stray away from the classifications of that specific racing, you can get ones with larger sails. For example, the Skeeter B class can go up to speeds of 150 miles an hour, in your flimsy little like ice sailboat with, I'm sure, excellent steering.
And braking, for that matter.
Yeah, braking is not an option. Sailboats are not great at braking. But it would be fine because, as Wikipedia puts it, there are no known governmental licensing or registration requirements. So you will not have to get a sailing license to sail this thing around. So ice boats, you can have an ice boat. You'll probably die.
How long do you think you would personally survive?
How long would I personally survive? It really depends on the wind speed. If the wind speed is 1 mile an hour and my max speed is then therefore 10 miles an hour, I think I will survive that day. If the wind speed is, say, 3 miles an hour and I can go 30 miles an hour, I might not survive that day.
I feel like it'd also just be you'll survive until you reach that first hard bend.
Until you have to do anything other than just not do anything.
Straight, yeah.
To go directly in the direction of the wind recklessly. So there's one legitimate solution that they actually use up in the Arctic where they have to go from water to ice and back and forth, which are Arctic airboats, which is basically just a fan boat that can work on ice. So the bottom can be either, it has it can go in the water and it's sturdy enough to land on ice. And it's just one of those you ever seen the Amazon specials or the Bayous things where they have the boat with the big fan on the back that blows it around? And they'll use these for search and rescue operations in the Alaskan time. And so you could theoretically buy an Arctic airboat. They get pretty fast. It's fine. But my real question is, can we just keep the water from freezing in the first place?
A lot of salt?
No, because it does get pretty cold.
I mean, how easy does running water freeze? Because it's still moving, right? That makes it harder.
Well, the problem is you can't freeze all the water, but you can
right.
100% freeze the surface everywhere. Your roads are only so wide.
I mean, the Charles River here in Boston, it moves fairly quickly, and it's not entirely fresh water, and the top will still freeze.
Yeah, the Charles River is it's 20 times as thick as wide as a road is, and it'll still freeze over in the winter in regular conditions.
Not this winter.
Yeah, I'll tell you what freezes at negative 17.5 degrees Fahrenheit, though.
What would that be?
80 proof vodka. So my thought is, what we gotta do is we just gotta get the alcohol content of the roads high enough that it doesn't freeze. And I think it's actually doubly good because not only will it keep it from freezing, it'll also sanitize it a bit and keep all this trash and shit and all these things we're throwing in there from being too much of a health hazard to people.
So how do we increase the alcohol content?
That's where I did some digging. In the United States of America, there are 4.12 million miles of road, and which is the equivalent of 17,800 square miles of land. If we assume roads on average are about 6 feet deep to give you enough, depth for your boat, we need about 20.3 cubic miles of vodka. My first question was, how much vodka do we actually, or how much booze do we actually make? Can we just change our booze production and just start dumping it in the rivers?
A direct
application of booze into the waters, into the streets. So this is assuming that the stuff we put in would cycle back into the streets. So it's not maintaining a pace, because that one's going to be a whole different calculation that I didn't do. But based on the internet, the average American consumes 9.2 liters per capita per year. And this is pure alcohol. So you can multiply by 2.5, you'd need 40% alcohol. So given that the US population is roughly 325 million, it makes 2.9 billion liters of pure alcohol, which means we have 7.4 billion liters of road vodka that we can make. So doing some unit conversion to put that into cubic miles, we need 20.3, remember, we get 0.0018 cubic miles.
That's a little less.
That's a little bit less than what we need. And I don't think we're going to be able to just increase production to get there. So we don't have nearly enough booze to fill our streets. But alcohol is fairly easy to make. All you really need is yeast and sugar. And you can just let the roads do their own processes and ferment. So do we have enough raw materials to just put all the ingredients to ferment in the roads to get them to make their own booze? Because this doesn't have to taste good. This doesn't have to be controlled, in a tank type.
I mean, you don't drink the water
fermentation.
from, the Charles River.
Yeah. That's already, yes, you already can't do this. And so, I don't think, so it's what you need is yeast and sugar, and I don't think the bottleneck's going to be yeast, because the yeast can survive, by consuming the sugar, and can just continuously do its job. So, we need is sugars. And so, because I'm thinking of 80 proof vodka, first thing I looked at is potatoes. Because I know we make, we got lots of those. We got lots of potatoes. It takes about 9 pounds of potatoes to make one 750 milliliter bottle of vodka, which is more than I expect. That's a lot of poundage of potatoes. Yeah. Scaling that up through some unit conversions, we would need a total of 1.02 quadrillion pounds of potatoes to make enough vodka to fill our streets. So the question is that how much potatoes do we make? Because that's also a ridiculous number. But as a point of comparison, the whole world produces 45 billion pounds of potatoes a year. So if we put all our potatoes in the river, in the U.S. rivers every year, it would only take us 22,000 years to grow enough potatoes.
It's reasonable.
Yeah, so that's not happening. But we're not limited to just potatoes. You can also make vodka out of corn. And it actually takes less corn to make the same 750 milliliter bottle of vodka. You only need 2.3 pounds instead of 9 pounds of potatoes. And we make way more corn than we make potatoes. So compared to the 45 billion pounds of potato a year, the world makes 1.5 trillion pounds of corn. Mathing that one out, now we'd only need 178 years to fill our streets with vodka. Again, not a great number. So that's just corn and potatoes. You can basically turn any wheat into sugars using yeast. The worldwide production of any types of wheat is 17.5 trillion pounds. So we're knocking down the years we need to turn our streets into alcohol down to just 15 years.
And presumably with a market for it, we could shrink that even more.
Yeah, it also doesn't. This calculation
what are we going to be
consider that we might want to eat some of that wheat.
That's a good point.
Like corn and potatoes.
Everyone just drinking from the river and getting drunk.
So assuming with the new demand, we can double our wheat production, and then that way half of it goes to feeding us and half of it goes into the roads. In 15 years, we could replace all our roads with the vodka that will not freeze in the winter. There is one last little hiccup in this plan, and that is the fermentation process produces alcohol, yay, and CO2, not so yay at large scales.
Oh boy.
Based on how much sugar we're consuming, this process, when it's done, would have created 59 trillion pounds of CO2 that would be added to the atmosphere.
So we would die. No, we wouldn't die?
No. Numbers are big. It's okay. Currently, compared to the 59 trillion, there are 6.6 quadrillion pounds of CO2 in the atmosphere. So it would be about a 1% increase in the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere, which is not the worst we've done.
No, but it's still a fairly significant new chunk.
It would contribute, but we're like on pace to like double the amount in the next 30 years or whatever the stupid number is. I don't look. It is
a better alternative to the ice boats.
Yeah.
Well, what about hovercrafts?
They're slow.
Are they really?
They're also not good at turns either.
Oh yeah, I bet they're not.
They're slow and not good at turns. Also, it breaks down. Like, you're just fucking stuck, and you're just floating downriver.
That is a very good point.
Also, we can make all the streets into vodka. Why aren't you on board with this?
Because
there's no food to eat.
I feel like I need a glass of vodka right now, which I think means it's time for our middle of the podcast break. Hey everybody, welcome to the section of the podcast that's mostly just me talking about things that we do and our podcast that you're already listening to. So if you like our podcast, leave us a review. Subscribe to our podcast. Download our podcast. Just download more podcast apps and download our podcast, and all those things. The numbers that I obsessively look at go up. And if you think we fucked something up, which I admit, rare, I know, rare, never happens. Or if you have your own hypothetical question you want us to try and answer, you can shoot us an email at absurdhypotheticals@gmail.com, or go to our Facebook page, Absurd Hypotheticals, and leave us a comment there. We'll be more than happy to take a look at it.
Oh.
We have two. We have the Absurd Hypotheticals page, and then if you want to chat with us direct, in real time, in Facebook chat, which is not so scary, you can go to Absurd Hypotheticals, Pals, Pals at the end there, where we have just an active chat going, and if we get notifications, we hop on and we respond to it. So you can talk to us directly and yell at us there and make us feel real bad about ourselves. In the non-Absurd Hypotheticals podcast space, there's a couple other things I'm excited about. Number one, my good friend Timothy Blank has released a new board game published by WizKids called Bamuntu, where you are an explorer going through the African jungle and riding all sorts of cool different animals in order to curry their favor and become the best at going through the jungle. I forget the exact thing that he
printed out
what
a
you're
description.
supposed to be trying to do. But the game is beautiful. It has these really nice animal tiles, and the gameplay is perfect for like a family setting. I've played it a bunch of times with friends, and I kind of just like breaking it out just to keep playing it. So check out Bamuntu. That's Bumuntu, and say I sent you, so that Tim tells me that I did a good job promoting him. And then since I'm promoting somebody else, I can go ahead and promote myself, and karmically it's about even. I am playtesting a new game, a single-player roll and write game, which means you're going to be able to print out a document, and then you have some dice, and as you roll, you progress through the game and mark down some things on a grid. Specifically, this game is called Rainfall, where the idea is you have a grid you're placing blocks onto in an effort to catch raindrops falling from the borders of the grid. But you have to be careful because the bridge throughout the game will rotate, and if you haven't locked in where your water is, it'll all spill out, and you'll have to start collecting water all over again. So you can find that at nerdchomp.com/Marcus Phoenix Games under prototypes. You can also find more episodes of our podcast there, and Chris's books, and our YouTube channel. Lots of good stuff on the Nerd Chomp. It's the header for all the things that we do.
I'll put links to all the stuff that you just said in the description too, so it's easier.
Awesome. Yeah, and that'll basically do it, and we'll go ahead and dive right into the next section. Welcome back, everybody. We are going to dive into the second question of our episode, and that is, what if cars existed in the past? What we did is we each took a different time period in history and saw what it would be like if they had modern cars. Basically, the way it works is the cars can basically just be magically made. Like, they can make the cars, they can maintain the cars to a degree, but they don't suddenly learn all the technology associated with the car. Like, they don't suddenly learn about electricity and, you know.
And they can't use the components of the car outside of the car, right?
Yeah, so
they can't, take the motor out, right?
Yeah, like, they can't take the motor out and, connect it to, a super trebuchet or something.
Yeah.
So it's built by Apple.
Yeah, it's built by Apple. Basically, you need the tiny, tiny screwdrivers to open it, and they don't have any tiny, tiny screwdrivers, nor can the Smiths make such a small Phillips head.
And they don't have Apple stores.
Yeah, they have no Apple stores where they can, drop it off, and instead of them fixing your car, they would just hand you a brand new one in a big, fancy box. Do any of you purchase Apple products, like phones?
Nope.
I've had a Apple laptops, MacBooks in the past.
So every time I get an Apple iPhone, it comes in a really nice box. So, it's not even, fancy. It's, just a nice material and, a solid box. And every time I struggle to throw it out because I'm just this is a nice box. I might need to keep my phone in a box at some point. But, of course, why would I ever do that? And I hold on to the stupid box forever. And then suddenly I just have, iPhone boxes from 2 phones ago.
That was our weird little tangent about iPod boxes.
Look, we can't talk about medieval cars without talking about Apple. By the way, I'm doing medieval times. So I'm going to go ahead and dive right in now that I've spoiled it for everybody. So what if there were cars in medieval times? As some of you might be thinking right now, first thing that jumped in my head is jousting in convertibles, because that's fucking awesome. So my first thing I was thinking about is horses accelerate pretty fast because they're animals, and cars comparatively, I think, accelerate fairly slow, was my initial impression. So I was like, are the jousting tracks long enough that a car can get up to speed in time so that you wouldn't have to just have a super long track that would be, you couldn't watch anymore because, it's all over there and all over there. Who's going to see the cars? So the average car, modern day car, can go to 0-60 in 6 to 8 seconds. So give it 8 seconds if it's a slow one on a dirt road. So it takes you about 4 seconds to get to 30 miles an hour, which is typical jousting speed, which I think is a safe place to stop because I don't think you want to go faster than typical jousting speed because jousting is already pretty dangerous as is.
Yeah, it's just take one night buying a Ferrari and killing just maybe not just in killing, just straight up impaling their opponent.
Yeah, that would be problematic for the jousting.
So
for the longevity of the jousting sport.
So the knights weren't supposed to die during the jousting, right?
No, they were not.
Okay.
Typically not supposed to die. There may have been. I didn't look at it, but I think there may have been like sometimes like punishment jousting, where like they had a jousting tournament where you got signed up for it, mostly against your will, and you weren't supposed to survive. But that's kind of an under the. I was gonna say under the covers, and now I can't think of the actual euphemism for doing something sneaky.
It wasn't like gladiators in Rome where they're supposed to die.
Yeah. Under
Correct.
wraps. Keep it under wraps.
Yeah.
That's the word.
Knights were educated people. They were, they were part of your army.
Yeah, they weren't.
They were white.
They weren't like slaves.
Yes, you don't want to destroy your army before you actually have to use them.
Right. So, back to the cars. You only need about 60 feet of distance to actually hit that 30-mile-an-hour speed with a car. So, the typical jousting tracks are already about 200 feet long, so 60 feet on each side, plus a few feet to get going. So the existing jousting tracks actually would work fairly well for car jousting. So there was one thing that is a problem, though, is that you can't get knocked out of a convertible fairly easily at all. And I think part of the way you survive a jousting lens is by you getting hit by it and then having space to, fly backwards off of the horse, or, space behind you to
Fall.
take off some of the impact. You don't want a seat directly behind you to stop you so you get impaled is basically where I'm getting at. Depending on what the technology of the medieval ages is, I'm not sure if they'd be able to rig up an ejection seat with a big button on front of the car, but I think they should hook up a big target on front of the car that connects to an ejector seat.
They probably have the technology to do that.
And I know we said it's cars, but what's better, and I have this in big bold letters, better, is motorcycle jousting.
Oh boy.
Because one, motorcycles have faster acceleration. It's only 3 to 4 seconds to 0 to 60. And it's more true of the original sport. Like, jousting is the goal is not to get knocked off your thing. So if you get hit on a motorcycle, you fall off your motorcycle. It's basically the modern horse. And then as I had that mental image, I was like, I wonder if this actually is a thing. Because I could see people doing this like in real life. And so I Googled motorcycle jousting, and most of the results are this 1981 American drama film written and directed by George A. Romero called Night Riders, where it's modern day. It's a bicycle gang that is a motorcycle gang that does jousting, and basically like the idea is that the leader of the gang is like he's very chivalrous. He's got this code of chivalry going that he's trying to make work with his gang. But, reality sets in and finances are tough for him. And the main villain of the plot is like a sponsor who is trying to promote them, but he's like shady. And there's all this drama. One of them ends up being gay. One of them like gets married. One of them runs off. There's a lot of like weird, just like interperson drama in this movie that I wouldn't expect from a motorcycle jousting movie. But basically the reason I mentioned it is because I was like, reading the description, I'm like, this is crazy. And then the end paragraph is basically this guy goes off to confront the promoter with his motorcycle, has a vision of his motorcycle being an actual horse, and then just gets hit by a bus and dies. And the movie ends with him just being dead.
So this isn't a comedy, or is it?
It might be like half black comedy where it's like, they know
how old is it?
They're being ridiculous. It's a 1981 film.
1981.
Written and directed by George A. Romero. It says also known as George A. Romero's Night Riders. And I'm just like, do you really need to like specify that? Like that you made this?
Well, I was going to say, because there's a TV show, Knight Rider, singular, with the talking car.
Maybe that's the reason.
Yeah.
So I didn't have a chance to watch the movie, even though it's kind of on my list now to watch. So I turned to not Google but YouTube to see if people would do it. And the closest I got, there's basically a video of a bunch of dudes wrapped in like 2-foot thick bubble wrap and on tiny dirt bikes that do some jousting. They're like they look like marshmallow men, and they're on these little dirt bikes, and they're just like out somewhere in the country, and their bubble wrap is all like painted up with like designs and hearts and flowers and all this nonsense. But it is not as epic as I imagined the Knights would do. I think the Knights would do it right. Sleek armor, cool lances, 6 cycles. So that's the jousting. But the medievals were not about just fake fighting. They were also about real fighting. a big component of medieval warfare was siege warfare. And so for me, I was like, awesome. So basically this kind of ends the siege warfare because you can just strap a log to the roof of a car and now you have the best battering ram in the world. There's a couple problems though. One, moats are a thing. And while you can get around, you can make like a temp bridge like quickly enough and get in there and get your car going. And the other thing was barbicans, where they'll build like a kind of a foyer in front of the main gate with a small entrance, so a car wouldn't get there. So there's some reason stopping it. But actually, the main thing is that, you know, breaking down the gate is not the typical way to end a siege. That's what you do if all else fails. Generally, the point of the siege is to starve out a even or superior force by, you know, draining them of their resources. So cars don't actually do a great job there, except for helping you resupply your troops, maybe by carrying wheat and grain and shit. But they're really actually not super helpful. Where I think it's cool is like open field warfare, because now cars in, you know, modern times, they're like used in war to, like, for transport and things. But what we actually use is like tanks and planes, and I don't think they ever had their real time to shine because
of guns.
They just have, yeah,
basically
like,
guns put a stop to that.
Guns put a stop to that. And what you have now is a car is basically the best weapon because it doesn't care about arrows and it doesn't care about foot soldiers. So my mental image of how this starts is you have just a line of, like, on one hill you have a line of troops and in front of them a line of cars. And then on the opposite hill, you have a line of troops, and in front of them, a line of cars. And your best strategy is just going to be to drive your cars and try to plow into many of their people as possible, which I think is great.
So I'm starting to imagine some Mad Max style cars.
Oh yeah, you're gonna
with
strap
ramps and
swords stapled to them and all this crazy shit going on.
I'm trying to imagine what the impact of running into a fully armored knight would be like in a car.
Not great for the car, but like, if you get like a Jeep, you're going to be in good shape. So this is what I'm thinking. So level 1 thinking, hey, I have cars. I'm going to drive my cars through their people. Next level thinking, oh, my opponent has cars, so I'm going to drive my cars into their cars, and then we're going to cancel out our cars so that nobody can drive into their people. And I think the next level is you bring horses back. Because if a horse hits a car, if a car hits a horse, the car is probably totaled. The horse is done, but the car is also probably totaled. But now you're up one car in the who has cars left metric. So you basically want to ride horses in for interference. You still got to deal with the horses. And so I think you're kind of just trying to ride your horses into their cars to reduce the number of cars they have available, so you are the only one left with cars.
So you're saying, let's sacrifice all our horses so that we have cars left.
Yeah.
Why wouldn't you sacrifice something less valuable?
Well, because there's really not that many things that big that are mobile in medieval times. Like, you can shoot, like, trebuchets and shit, but it's going to be hard to aim at a car. It's hard to aim at, like, a castle with a trebuchet. So that's a little bit sad. There's another thing you can do to prevent cars, and which is literally just pick a rainy day or a muddy spot. And now your cars are really bad and embarrassing fighting components all of a sudden. Which brings me up to a slight point in that roads are a concern. Because roads are basically, in the medieval times, are basically just worn down paths where people have trodden. So a major road is basically a rut or channel that has been worn into the ground. And this rut or channel specifically would get extra muddy when it rained. And generally what people do is they would walk on the neighboring fields, and they might have like a slight side path. There might be like a main path and like a rainy path. Cars are not good at either of those paths.
So I guess there'd be more of a preference for off-roading vehicles.
Right. And that brings me to another point where I've written better again in big, bold capital letters. Motorcycles are going to be better in these cases because, one, they're much better at off-roading. And if you get your motorcycle stuck in a mud, you can just pull it out. You can just push it. It's hard to push a car, but you can push a motorcycle no problem and just keep going.
So I guess this means something like the Battle of Agincourt doesn't happen, where the French get stuck in the mud and they lose to a far numerically inferior British force, and get killed by arrows. But with motorcycles,
no problem.
Presumably they can just keep going.
Just get a dirt bike going. And the motorcycle cavalry, I think, will actually be even more effective on the battlefield because they are still like the same, like close to the advantage of a car. Not quite as good because you don't have a big old body to run in things, but your motorcycle cavalry is going to be very effective, and it's much more maneuverable and less likely to hit a horse. So, what if medieval times had cars? They could do some stuff. What if they had motorcycles? They could do stuff better.
Solid conclusion.
Chris, what's your take on your time period?
So I didn't look at medieval times. I looked at ancient Egypt, and I wanted to see how cars would affect the construction of pyramids. When I started my research, I found that like the techniques.
It was aliens.
Yes, it was the aliens. Case closed. The end.
They were like, "Why do we need cars for? We got like hover ships."
That was like literally everyone commenting on all the articles I was looking at was just about aliens.
Oh my god.
Now, the thing I found is that it's still like under debate how the pyramids were built. And there are like different methods for the different types of pyramids, how they were built. So I actually picked one specific pyramid. It's the famous one. It's the Pyramid of Giza, which is one of the 7 wonders of the world. And this one was built in the 4th dynasty, which was it was like around 2580 BC, around there. And it was built for Pharaoh Khufu.
Khufu, that's a cool name.
It is. There's an H in there. You wouldn't expect.
It's Coolfu.
Coolafu.
It's the coolest of the kung fus.
Yeah. And they believe that this pyramid took 20 years to build. And it was 450 feet high. And then at the base, on each side, it was 750 feet wide. And it was made up of 2.3 million blocks. And each block, the weight of each block varied, but it was like around 3 tons per block. But then it went up to like 50 tons for some of the big blocks.
God, how the fuck do they do this?
Oh, it's crazy. The 50-ton blocks weren't that common. Those were like only the inner chamber.
I mean, still, Chris, it sounds really hard. Almost impossible. I think it must have been aliens.
It must have been aliens. So what materials were these blocks made out of? The main material that they used was limestone, which they got from the city called Tura, and that was actually right next to their build site. So they didn't have to transport it that far. It was like just across the river. And they also used granite, which was only 8,000 tons, but it's still a decent amount. And that was actually from a place called Aswan. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly. Aswan.
Asgard.
Yeah. And that was not right next to the build site. That was 500 miles away. They actually transported that. So in addition to limestone and granite, they also had gypsum mortar, which was 500,000 tons. So how do the cars come into play? Obviously, I think the main thing is just transportation of these materials. The limestone, I don't think it would really have that much impact because it's like right next to the build site. But the granite traveling 500 miles is very significant. I think how they transported them back then was mainly just by boat on the Nile. And then once they were off of the river, they used sleds, like wooden sleds, and they just pulled it in the sand. And actually, I guess they lubricated the sand with water, which made like a slick sludge, and then they just pulled the sled in the sand.
I'm just trying to compare like this whole feeling of dragging this rock miles and miles and miles to like the way I feel when I like go from my 3rd-story apartment to take out the trash and then come back up and take down recycling, and like how I feel on the stairs back up on my second trip. And I'm trying to compare that to carrying like something that's actually heavy an actual distance, and it is not. It's crazy.
Yeah, and that was just
aliens, I say.
Aliens. And that was just transporting it like on the ground. They actually don't know how they got them like onto the higher levels of the pyramid exactly. They think it was a combination of ramps and levers, but they're not exactly sure.
What about those and like logs, right? And they like place logs underneath some of the blocks?
I think that was
over the flats.
I don't think that's actually true. I forget what they said about that. I think they said that was like they disproved that or something.
Is it good to know? Is that your takeaway? Are you gonna use that? Are you gonna apply that to your day-to-day, Aaron Hoffman?
Probably not, but it's
I just imagine you like having like a big like delivery coming in, and then like you're like, oh man, how do I get this inside? And then you see like 3 like mailing tubes on the ground, and you're like, wait, no, that'll never work. I learned about this. on Absurd Hypotheticals. It has improved my life. It has saved me wasting time trying to roll this big box on logs.
So I wanted to compare the pulling power of a car to the pulling power of just people pulling. Or actually, first, I want to look at the transporting the granite 500 miles and compare that to like an 18-wheeler in modern day. So the legal weight for an 18-wheeler to hold is 40 tons. But I found an article. It was like a promotional thing for the FH16 heavy-duty truck. And this truck towed up to 750 tons.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's like 2 rocks.
It was 40 shipping containers behind it. It was
Empty? Empty shipping containers, I hope?
I don't think so.
What kind of permit does that require?
Well, it wasn't. It was like a promotional thing. It was like in a closed area.
And then some guy comes on from the background and is like, built Ford tough.
Yeah. And it was actually, I forget, I didn't write down how fast they were going, but it was super slow.
Oh, yeah, I imagine.
Yeah. So it's actually not practical. So I'm just going to go with the 18-wheeler legal limit of 40 tons. And that means that they'd have to make 200 trips per to get all the granite from that one city.
That doesn't seem so bad.
Yeah, compared to like what they actually did, it's not that bad.
How far away is the city again?
500 miles.
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay, I thought it was the close city. Never mind. Yeah, that's still a long trip.
Then presumably they would have more than one truck available to them.
Yeah, I didn't know how to determine how many trucks they had. So,
Or how long it would take them to drive over the desert 500 miles back and forth.
well, okay, so I'll get to that.
Oh, cool. Okay. I won't spoil anything.
Yeah, how long did it take for them to actually do that with just boats on the Nile? I looked up the boat that they used, or like boats that they had at that time, and they could travel 45 miles in a day. That's like 2 miles per hour, basically.
That's respectable, though.
Yeah. Comparatively, if the truck is traveling at 50 miles per hour, it only take 10 hours. And in the boat would take 10 days. So 10 hours, 10 days. Yeah, pretty.
About the same measurement, yeah.
About the same.
About the same. 10 hours, 10 days. I'm sensing the edge of a conspiracy. If the whole pyramid takes 10 years, it was the aliens.
It was, yeah. And then so that was basically my conclusion, was just that trucks are faster than boats. After all, like a whole day of research, I concluded that cars are faster than boats. But
you're just having side by side like a picture of a boat and a picture of a truck. It's like, which one of you is faster?
And then I realized that so in this time they didn't actually use wheels for transportation yet. They did use wheels for like other stuff, but not for transportation. And the chariot wasn't introduced until 1,000 years later than this. So they didn't have any roads or anything. And like the majority of travel is just on the Nile, and then they wanted to go like to other places that aren't the Nile. They built canals. So like water was their main transportation. So no roads. They might have had like walking paths or something, but it wouldn't have been, the sand wouldn't have really been that compact. So
Oh, yeah.
so cars would just get stuck in the sand. There are like sand buggies and stuff and like off-roading vehicles, but nothing that like carries cargo. So like heavy vehicles would get stuck in the sand. So I don't actually think that cars would help with the construction of the pyramid that much. They could help carry the material up the ramps a little, but
I mean, I feel like just transporting things easier. It's very hard to do, but I feel like you're going to get some value out of having an 18-wheeler as an ancient Egyptian.
not if it's stuck in the sand. They're just
Well, okay, so you put it on a series of logs.
what they're going to end up doing is just pulling the truck instead of pulling the block.
Okay, yeah. Okay, so yeah. I'm coming around to your side of the equation.
So, conclusion, no cars, aliens did it. That's my answer. Aaron, what did you do?
So I did the Renaissance, and I didn't really focus on anything in particular. There's a few different issues that I thought I was thinking of. The Renaissance is known for its trade in particular. So there was this explosion of trade across Europe, particularly the Italian Renaissance, Venice and Florence and Milan. Just to give you an idea of travel, walking from Venice to Florence is 54 hours. So once you add in breaks and sleep, you're looking at a 3 to 4 day trip.
Oh, yeah.
Driving, on the other hand, is 3 hours. I know nothing about Italian traffic, but if it's anything like Boston, it can't be good. So one of the things I was thinking about, and what cars did for American history, was it allowed for suburbs to happen. It allowed for people to come in from outside the city and live with more space. And that brought me to the bubonic plague. And would it be less effective or more effective with cars? And I didn't really reach a conclusion. On one hand, it would be easier for the plague to travel from city to city. Though, on the other hand, once it's reached a city, if people aren't living on top of each other because they can live outside the city, they can travel in for whatever work, it might be easier to quarantine and prevent the spread within a city.
Oh, interesting. Let me think about it. I'm gonna decide right now if bubonic plague would have killed everyone or not. Well, I guess it would depend on when it happened, because it depends when they get the cars and how long.
You didn't
they
decide
have
just
to...
then. You kind of.
I'm thinking it out. I have a process. If it came out and they were in the suburbs already, I think they're better off. Because I think that also the conditions for the bubonic plague to form in the first place is these cramped, nasty cities. So if you live the good old suburban life with your safe streets, your 9-to-5 jobs, and your good school districts, you're going to be in good shape and not make the bubonic plague happen. But yeah, if it starts and you now have cars to go everywhere, everyone's dead. So it depends on the time. I think it's maybe 60% people live, 40% everyone dies. That is the historical scientific
based
answer.
on no
Very
research at all.
Based on me leaning back in my chair and putting my hands behind my head, acting like I'm thinking.
So, as I said before, trade was rapidly increasing at the time. Though I can't imagine that cars would really be the new mode of transportation to deliver goods. It's just, they seem, if we're sticking to just cars, they seem too small and it would be too costly to move things. I can imagine if you had to rush something that you could hire someone to drive it from city to city, but meanwhile, it's just much cheaper, I feel like, to ship something using a ship.
Yeah, I agree with that, definitely.
So the next thing is, how do we fuel? So just because cars have magically appeared in front of us doesn't mean that they'll continuously run without fuel. And if there is no crude oil, then how do you fuel them? And I think the answer is animal and vegetable oil. It appears that the specific energy and the energy density for animal and vegetable oil is actually relatively close to that of gasoline.
Is that how much energy you get by using it, like per weight or whatever it is?
So you're concerned about how much energy per kilogram and how much energy per liter.
Okay, yeah. So yeah.
So if it's too heavy or if it takes too much space, it just doesn't make sense as a fuel. Just to give you an idea, I'm going to give you a few numbers. Gasoline has a specific energy of 46.4 millijoules per kilogram and a energy density of 34.2 millijoules per liter. Meanwhile, animal and vegetables are about mid-30s for both, 37 millijoules per kilogram and 34 millijoules per liter.
That's like a lot closer than I would have expected it to be, because I felt like, all this gasoline is like some fancy ass like super fuel that we're putting in, like, and then it's like you could just fry a pig. You can throw some fucking bacon in there and get the same effect.
Well, and then you hear about today. There's people that will go to restaurants and diners and pick up, not just pick up for free, will get paid to pick up their leftover oil and just stick it into their car.
Well, there's people who eat Tide Pods too, so there's, you can't
I don't
just
know
say
if you
people
can
do
group
it.
those two people in the same category.
Look, I'm not going to draw a Venn diagram right now, but, maybe there's a little something.
Well, just to put this all a little more into perspective, nuclear energy is, as you can imagine, very powerful. We're talking for plutonium-238, which is used in thermal generators, radioisotope thermal generators. We're talking the millions of millijoules per kilogram and per liter.
Compared to, 40?
Yes.
So, why don't we just use nuclear power, huh? I get not in my backyard, but, there's, this is, millions of numbers of difference. It's not it's 40 and this one's twice as good. It's there's 40 and, this one is all the energy ever.
Well, if you invite me back, I'd be happy discussing it.
Have a nuclear energy discussion.
I could definitely complain about fossil fuels for an hour.
Anyways, so rapeseed oil or canola oil seems to be the
Aaron, we're a family podcast.
It is kind of
Seems
strange
to be the
that
vegetable
it's
of
called
choice.
rapeseed.
It's rapeseed.
Corn can only be found in the Americas. So canola oil what have you had to use? And it can be found naturally in Europe. One more thing, the whaling trade I feel like would also explode a few hundred years before it actually did.
Oh, to get the sweet whale blubber.
Oh yes.
Just shove my car full of whales.
And a couple hundred more years of unregulated whaling, and I hope you've seen a whale at some point in your life.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I can't, I'm being hypocritical complaining because I killed all the horses, but you can't kill all the whales. I love whales. They're my favorite
No,
animal.
that was our first episode about whales.
Chris wrote a whale song
I
out
did.
of whale noises.
We wouldn't have the orchestra.
So you're saying that if there were cars in the Renaissance, your podcast would not exist?
Yeah. That's exactly what we're saying.
One more thing that popped into my head. What was the last time you saw someone try to hijack a car while it's going 60 miles an hour?
When I saw Fast and Furious.
When Chris got his ankle run over. Wait, that's not what happened.
Well, anyways, I feel like highway robbery would not be a thing as much. If you're traveling on the road with a wagon,
Yeah.
to the brim, you're a pretty easy target.
That's a pretty good crime statistic if the highway robbery is going to go down. Car theft, way up.
Oh, yes.
Percentage-wise, infinite. It's undefinable how high that percentage is going up.
Well, anyways, I don't know how different it would be from other times, but it would certainly push trade to even faster than it was.
Oh yeah,
at that point.
Get that development going, and 40% chance everyone's dead of the plague. So
I got that going for me.
yeah, so 60%, 40% of the time, it doesn't matter how the trade's going. Everyone's dead. And I think everyone dying is a great place to end our podcast.
I mean, that's usually where we end.
So thank you everyone for joining us, and tune in next week for the following questions. What if the Earth was a donut? And what if all vehicles disappeared?